Good morning or afternoon or evening, friends. So we will start with the verse for today. The verse I've picked for all of us to look at today is verse 46 from the second chapter. So this is how the verse goes. Yavanartha udapane sarvataha samplutodake tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanataha. And I'm going to first read the literal translation of the verse for you. To the knower of the supreme truth, the Vedas are of no more use than a well when the land all around is in flood. I'm going to read it again because it's a very brief verse. To the knower of the supreme truth, the Vedas are of no more use than a well when the land all around is in flood. I was thinking as I was meditating on this verse today morning, I'm so grateful to have chosen the Bhagavad Gita to spend a morning every week on. It's certainly benefiting me immensely, and I'm enjoying a lot meditating on these beautiful verses. I'm very drawn to some of these verses from the second chapter, and certainly these are all some of my favorite verses in the Gita. Last week, I think we saw one of my top three. And in fact, this particular verse that we are looking at today, I want to start from there, from verse 40 that we looked at last week. This one, verse 46, is, again, like I said, it's one of my favorite verses. It's a very important idea that Krishna is presenting to Arjuna. Sometimes this verse can be misunderstood, and even if not understood right, it's not clear how to apply it in our own life. So it's worth discussing and meditating on this verse because it has a lot to offer to us. In the last week, we saw that incredible promise that Krishna gave Arjuna, Swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. Even a little practice of this religion will free you from dire fears and colossal suffering. Now, we are in the midst of the second chapter where Krishna is presenting to Arjuna the essence of this teaching, why he should fight this battle. So when he says, a little practice of this religion, it's worth asking. We have to look at the verses before and after to see what is he talking about. And as I was mentioning in the last webinar, oftentimes Swami Kriyananda also translated this word as inner religion. Even a little practice of this inner religion will free one from dire fears and colossal suffering. Why is it so? In what context is Krishna presenting this teaching to Arjuna? Because that's what will help us understand this better, the essence of this promise, what it is that we should practice to free us from dire fears and colossal suffering. Well, Krishna briefly introduces before the 40th verse. He's talking to Arjuna about non-attachment, about inner non-attachment to the things of this world and surrendering to the divine. That's kind of the theme that we are working with. That's what Krishna is teaching to Arjuna. But after he presents this 40th verse, he goes on to describe Vedic rituals and ceremonies and scriptural teachings, and he clarifies even further what this religion is by actually telling us what it is not. Even before going to verse 46, I wish I could go through each and every verse. It'll probably take a very long time for me to get through the Bhagavad Gita. So in interest of that, I am picking, every fourth or fifth or 10th verse in the Gita so we can look at some of these concepts, but also, jump on these peaks rather than needing to go through every single part of the trail. But in this class, I thought it will be helpful for me to read the translation of a couple of verses before that I'm skipping through. These are verses 43 and 44 of the second chapter of the Gita, and this is the English translation of these verses. Vedic rituals and other outward practices lead one to oneness with God. Vedic rituals and other outward practices lead not to oneness with God, nor do promises of superior pleasures in the astral world. All these lead rather to repeated earthly rebirths. Those who, incapable of discriminating between right and wrong, seek personal power and superior sense pleasures by the practice of Vedic rituals, deepen their ego attachment. They cannot achieve the inner equilibrium that comes through meditation and miss also the true goal of life, union with God. So Krishna is clarifying to Arjuna, quite simply put, he's saying, the religion I'm talking about here is not outer ritual. It's not merely the routine practice of scriptures or blind adherence to rules and of what you should or shouldn't do. What he's talking about, like I mentioned, is inward non-attachment and surrender to the divine. And we will see further in the verses of the same chapter, as we go through verses 50, 55, more verses that will come after this, he's talking about the practice of meditation. He's talking about withdrawing our senses from the outer world. He's going to describe how, like a tortoise draws its limbs into the shell, we have to draw our senses into our spine so that we are not constantly drawn, our energy is not always going out. So he is talking about the practice of inner communion, essentially the practice of meditation, and he's clarifying to Arjuna. It's important for us to understand because the verse 40 that we looked at last week has to be understood in the right light. The religion that Krishna is talking about, it is true, the promise is incredible. Even a little practice has great benefits, but this is not the religion merely of outward practice. That's how it's often misunderstood. Sometimes when these verses are not seen in the right light or the right context, it is not merely performing your puja or doing your rosary or whatever it is those rituals mean to you, but it's essentially the inner attitude, how we hold our consciousness, how we perform them, what is our intention, and above all our sincerity in seeking, which is seeking God realization, the ultimate goal of these scriptural practices. In the commentary on the 46th verse, which is what we looked at today, Swami Kriyananda, shares this beautiful story from the life of Saint Francis, which is a perfect encapsulation of this teaching. Saint Francis, for those of you who know, was a great, great saint of the Christian tradition. Yogananda ji often called him his patron saint. He had a very close relationship with Saint Francis. Saint Francis was a complete renunciate who renounced everything of this world and lived a hermit-like life with nothing belonging to him. Even the monastic order that he created lives by those rules up to today, if you visit Assisi and the parts where he lived. And there's a story from his life where St. Francis meets this very poor beggar woman. And she is in a terrible condition. She has no food, nothing to care for herself with. And St. Francis also is poor. He does not have anything to share with this lady. He wants to help her. He thinks about what it is that he can give her. And finally, he realizes he has this copy of Bible that is worth something, that can be sold in the market for whatever it's worth, and that could give her some food. So just out of his compassion of the heart, he gives away his copy of the Bible to this beggar lady. And then he walks away, but there's this pain in his heart. He's praying to Jesus. He's telling him, Lord, I have given away your word. I've given away this valuable possession that was important for me, which was helping me tune in to you. And then he feels this response coming from Jesus in his own heart. I think I'll read, in fact, Swami's exact words, where Jesus tells him, Francis, I've planted my word in your heart. You have no need for that mere printed copy. Now that's really what we are talking about in this verse, the true essence and the purpose of Scripture, not of the outward practices, because essentially that is the practice that is going to save us from dire fears and colossal suffering. Such stories exist not just in the Christian tradition, but in traditions all around the world, in all traditions of Sanatana Dharma. I was reminded of the life of Swami Shankaracharya, Adi Shankara, as we like to refer to him. His entire life is filled with such stories of how that inner communion, that essence of spiritual practice is more important than any ritual we can practice. Even at the age of 7, Adi Shankara was called to the life of a renunciate. He was just a brahmachari. He had just had a sacred thread ceremony and he was practicing those rituals. And immediately one day, as the story is told, he sees the color orange. And he has this sudden realization that that color is his and that he needed to take the Swami vows. He needed to take sannyas and walk away from this world and his family, his mother essentially. Now he does do it, and there's a story of how that happens. I'm not going to go into that. But the point I'm trying to make is throughout his life, he was often rebuked. Today we see and know Adi Shankara as an avatar, and we are not critiquing how he lived his life because we understand that he was a man of God. But during his lifetime, when we look at history, he was rebuked and criticized constantly for breaking the rules. He should not have taken the vow of sannyas at the age of 7 because he needed to go through all 4 ashrams of his life. He needed to be a householder, then he needed to live a hermit life in the forest before taking complete vows of renunciation. But Swami Shankara was living in accordance to this verse from the Gita. His consciousness was flooded with that divine realization. Why does he need that well anymore? He of course can walk away even at the age of 7. He can take that ultimate vow of sannyas and complete renunciation because he was living according to his own highest dharma. But the point is, we all, I'm speaking for myself, not all of us might have our consciousness filled with this flood. So what does this verse mean to us? What does it mean when we talk about the well? We have to understand in essence also that Krishna is not demeaning or discrediting that well. That well is a source of water. That's how we draw upon that divine consciousness in our own life through spiritual practices, whatever that is, through discipline, by doing your rosary, by doing those rituals, doing those pujas and chanting the name of the Lord. But all that Krishna is saying is, don't get confused, don't get distracted. The point here, the bottom line here is not the well, but the water. What we are seeking is the experience and not the form. That's really the point that Krishna is making through this verse in the Gita. And this example is so vivid. So many of these images that the scriptures present to us are so true. The Bhagavad Gita was shared more than 2,500 years ago, and yet that symbol is still as applicable as it was when Krishna shared it. I also think of, like a droplet on a lotus leaf, like the tortoise drawing its limbs. These symbols are so timeless, and they communicate these teachings to us so powerfully. I think of that well. Yes, that well is important. We are drawing water from that well. But the point is the water. And ultimately what we are seeking is for our consciousness to be flooded with that water, because the more we are able to draw on that water from that well, the more water we have in our lives, the more of that divine consciousness we have for ourselves. So that is the teaching that we have to constantly remember and practice in our own lives. Because going on that same symbol, depending upon the context that we have all incarnated in this life, that well might look very different for each one of us. If you happen to have taken incarnation in a Catholic setting, that well is your practice of rosary, is attending Mass, is tuning into Jesus and Mary and communion with these two forms of divine and seeing God through these rituals in the Catholic Church. And if you were born in a Hindu family, that might look very different. You might be doing pujas, rituals, aratis, participating in sacred ceremonies, visiting saints, visiting sacred pilgrimage sites. If you were born in the Sikh religion, you might be serving food in the Gurudwara, you might be serving with other devotees and helping the community. So that well looks very different depending upon the context of one particular incarnation. And as we all know, hopefully, this is our last one. We have been fortunate enough to be exposed to these high teachings of liberation. But it is also possible that we have some leftover karma that we might have to incarnate to finish. And the next time we come along, it might look different. We might be standing next to a different well. So if we attach too much to that outward form, we miss the point. Because no matter what well it is that is next to us, the point is the water. The well is merely that outward form that is facilitating all these outward rituals. The scriptures themselves, Krishna is constantly talking about the Vedas, and the Vedas are the highest authority in Sanatana Dharma of India, in the Hindu religion. And he is still saying the Vedas are of no use. Essentially saying that what we are seeking is the kingdom of God, is that experience. Religion is only as effective and as useful as it is taking us towards God realization. I've heard this quote, It is often attributed to Swami Vivekananda, but I've not been able to confirm that. But it is still a beautiful idea that I often remind myself of. So I'll share with you if any of you know what the true source of this quote is, or if it is in fact something that came from Swami Vivekananda, I would love to hear. It is simply this, that we are fortunate to be born in a religion. It's a great fortune of a human life to incarnate in a religion, but a curse to die in one. He's not talking about somehow religion being low or discrediting religious practices or the sacred scriptures or anything like that. But the point of life, the goal of life, is to seek that water. Ultimately, one day, as we keep drawing more and more water from that well, we realize we start living these truths, and then we know that the water is all that we need. And we start identifying with that water. We are flooded with that water, that there is nothing else left. So it is a curse to die in a religion, not in the sense that the religion still exists in our life, or we might be practicing some of this during the time of death, but simply that we are confused. It is a curse to be confused even at the time of death, to equate outward religion to be any accomplishment. Because the only thing that is worth holding on to is that inner realization, that inner communion with the divine. Talking of the life of Swami Shankara, one of his greatest philosophical treatises is this beautiful poem called Bhaja Govindam. It's an encapsulation of the entire Advaita philosophy and of spiritual life. And there's a story again of how he wrote this song. But the very first verse of that song, he says, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam Mudamate. Think of the Lord, chant of the Lord, always meditate on the Lord. That's all matters. And then he goes on to say, Samprakte samvihite kale nahi nahi rakshati dukram karane. It literally means at the time of death, at that final time of transition when you're leaving this plane, the rules of what you can and cannot do will not help you. And that is the teaching that Krishna is presenting to us. These rules, these rituals, they are not going to help you at that final moment when you have to release the form, when you have to release this bodily identity. So in that sense, it is a curse if we are holding on to that form till the end of our life. But we don't have to wait till the end of our lives. Even in our daily practices, the more and more we are tuning into that aspect of inner communion, the more we can make that practice of meditation the core of our life. And all these other devotional practices, whether it's japa, chanting, your rosaries or your puja ceremonies, these all can be inspiring. But ultimately, we want to feel that inspiration, devotion in these ceremonies and draw it into our spine, offer it up at the point between the eyebrows, focus on that inner communion, inner non-attachment, and surrender to divine. That is the purpose of life. That is the goal of life, as Swami describes, the union with God. Now, before I finish this webinar, somebody had asked me a question based on from one of the previous webinars. I think this was from the episode where I was talking about, again, a verse from the second chapter of how Krishna is describing to Arjuna the inevitability of change and death. And I was describing in that episode an exercise that Swami Kriyananda shared with all of us and encouraged all of us to do every day. And this is a practice where when we go to bed, we simply visualize and imagine this huge bonfire and offer everything, all our attachments, desires, anything we identify as ourselves into that fire, and feel that burning away and feel us completely dissolving into God. And the question is very interesting and rather subtle, so I thought it might be worth addressing it, during my talk. The question was this, I don't remember the exact words, but in essence it was simply this, that what about the desire for liberation, and what about desire for spiritual experiences? What about those desires that are taking us forward? Should we offer those into the fire as well? Now, it is worth thinking about and discussing because there is a distinction here. Swami Kriyananda, I think in one of his writings, called the desire for liberation and the desire for God the desireless desire, because it is a different kind of a desire, and it is that desire which will ultimately take us to our final goal of that union with divine. And I think in another place he describes a beautiful exchange that he himself had with Anandamoyi Ma, where he was telling Anandamoyi Ma, I feel so selfish. I always want to be in your company. I always want to just be sitting in your presence. I feel like I'm taking so much from you. I feel like somebody else would benefit if I would just move away. And then she looked at him and smiled and said, how can that which liberates the ego, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact words now, but in essence what she was telling him is, how can that which is freeing the ego be considered of the ego? In essence, she was saying what he was doing was completely fine, because that desireless desire is really what takes us forward. That's what's helping us grow and evolve in life. But there is a subtlety there, which I do want to talk about, because the question also had references to spiritual desires and experiences and things that we might seek that are of spiritual nature. And the distinction is the attachment of the ego. Because as much as we expand ourselves in spiritual desire, goes back to that same verse that we were discussing and thinking about today, they are helpful only in as much as they release that hold of ego on us. But if they're strengthening that ego, they are not helpful. And in fact, when I was thinking and meditating on this question and this practice itself, I was realizing that if it is not a desire that is strengthening the ego, that is going to affirm that ego identity, when we offer it into the fire, it actually doesn't go away. That desire itself is fanned. The embers of the fire are going to consume yourself in that same desire for liberation and for God, but only if you are able to detach it from the ego. If we do attach it to the ego, and these might be some things that are very inane, these might not look like desires of this world, because they are not. These are not material desires. I want to go on a pilgrimage to the sacred temple. I want to go spend more time with the saint. I want to travel to this place. I want to have this particular spiritual experience. I want to go deep in my own meditation, which is, one of the highest desires one can have. But the subtlety that we want to watch out for in our own consciousness is how much we are investing in it with our ego, and how much of it is simply this desire to get away from that ego, because that is the distinction. Because at the end of the day, in the life of Jesus Christ himself, Lord, thy will be done. When Jesus was facing this critical end of his life, this great drama, this torture that he had to go through with his own physical body, he was not actually pleased with it. He was in fact telling God, he was being very vocal about it. He said, Lord, let this cup pass from me. Let's just be done with this and let's just move on. And then he says, thy will not mine be done, because that is that sign of ego detachment. Lord, let me go on this pilgrimage if it be thy will. Because what will liberate me is not that pilgrimage, but your presence. What will liberate me is not that experience in meditation, not that vision, not even the physical company of a saint or the guru, but simply the vibration and the attunement with that consciousness. In the life of Yoganandaji himself, many of his great disciples, Gyanamata, and I can say pretty much all of his disciples, talk so much about how they did not constantly seek to be in his presence, to seek personal counsel, personal conversation with him. Because all that they were seeking, if they were in tune with this path and if they had the right attitude, they were seeking attunement. And Gyanamata, who was one of the highest disciples, one of the most advanced disciples that Yoganandaji had, she writes about how she would often not even want to be in his presence, because she just wanted to feel that vibration all the time. So that desire to be noticed by him, the desire to even stand next to him or even have a conversation with him, she felt in some way was coming in between, was taking her further from feeling that vibration all the time. It is so subtle, we may or may not be able to live up to such high standards. If we are called to seek a saint's company, let's go ahead and seek it. But I'm talking about all of this in reference to this particular activity of this offering ourselves into this bonfire. So when we are affirming that self-offering, when we are affirming that complete surrender to the divine, there is really no need to hold anything back, even our spiritual desires. We can throw it into the fire and tell God, God, I do want to go on this pilgrimage. I do want to spend time in the company of the saint. I do want to go deeper in my meditation, if it be your will. if it will help me spiritually. Ultimately, all I want is your presence in my life. All I want is to expand my consciousness and grow deeper and deeper until one day my consciousness can be flooded with the water of divine realization. So, we'll meet again next week. God bless you.